There's a particular kind of silence a narcissist has never learned to survive. Not the silence of a breakup, not the silence of no contact. A different silence entirely. The silence of someone who is still standing right in front of, still answering their texts, still showing up to dinner, and yet, for the first time, isn't buying a single word they're saying. That silence, the silence of being seen through while still being present, is one of the most devastating experiences a narcissist can ever go through. And today, that's exactly what we're unpacking. Not the moment someone finally leaves a narcissist, the moment before that. The moment they realize the performance has stopped working, that the audience is still in the room but has quietly stopped clapping, and there is nothing, absolutely nothing, more destabilizing to them than that. Stay with me until the end, because there's a very specific psychological collapse that happens here. One that most people misread as the narcissist changing, when really, it's something far more revealing than that. Let's start with what makes a narcissist function in the first place. Not their confidence, not their charm, their believability. Every narcissist, whether they're loud and grandiose or soft-spoken and quietly manipulative, is running on one core resource: your willingness to believe the version of reality they're presenting to you. The version where they're the victim, not the cause. The version where their cruelty was actually love, misunderstood. The version where every inconsistency in their story has a reasonable explanation if you just think about it hard enough, generously enough, one more time. This entire system depends on one thing and one thing only: you doubting yourself faster than you doubt them. And for a long time, it works. Because you want to believe them. You want the person you love to be telling you the truth. That want is not weakness, it's decency. It's the same decency they exploit every single day. But something shifts, quietly, invisibly, long before you ever say a word about it out loud. It starts small, a story that doesn't quite line up with one they told months earlier, a reaction that's slightly too big or too small for what actually happened, an apology that sounds identical to the last 12 apologies, word for word, like a recording being replayed instead of a person actually reflecting. And you start noticing, not accusing, not confronting, just noticing. And this is the exact moment a narcissist's entire operating system begins to fail, because they can survive being caught. What they cannot survive is being quietly, calmly, unemotionally seen. Here's why that distinction matters so much. Being caught implies an event, a specific lie exposed, a specific moment of confrontation, something they can respond to with tears, or anger, or a counter-accusation, or one of the dozen other tools in their arsenal. Being caught gives them something to perform against, but being seen isn't an event. It's a shift in you. It's the quiet, internal recalibration where you stop taking their words at face value and start watching their patterns instead. And you can't perform against a pattern watcher, because patterns don't care about the performance in the moment. They care about consistency over time. And consistency is the one thing a narcissist has never had to maintain, because they've never had to. Someone was always resetting the score for them the moment the tears started. So when that stops, when you sit there, calm, unreactive, listening to the explanation and simply not reacting the way you used to, something happens to them that looks, from the outside, almost like panic. Except panic is too visible a word for what's actually occurring internally. It's closer to vertigo. Their entire sense of control in the relationship has always been built on predicting your reaction and shaping it in advance. And now your reaction has become unreadable to them. You're not crying. You're not screaming. You're not begging for reassurance the way you used to. You're just watching. And there is nothing more terrifying to a person whose power depends entirely on your emotional response than a person who has quietly stopped supplying one. This is where you'll start to notice something fascinating, if you haven't already. The tactics escalate, not because they're winning, but because the old dosage stopped working, and they're instinctively increasing it, the same way anything does when it stops producing the expected result. The charm gets louder. The stories get more elaborate. The apologies get more theatrical, more specific, sometimes even including details you never asked for, as if extra detail alone might restore your belief. And underneath every escalated attempt is a question they will never ask you directly, because asking it out loud would mean admitting the fear driving it. Do you still believe me? And here's the part almost nobody talks about, the part that changes everything once you understand it. A narcissist doesn't actually need you to love them the way you think they do. What they need, at a level beneath conscious thought, is your belief. Belief is the currency their entire identity is built on. Because if you stop believing the version of them they've constructed, you force them to confront the version underneath it. And that version is the one thing they have spent their entire life running from. And that version is the one thing they have spent their entire life running from. Not the bad version most people imagine when they picture a narcissist. Something quieter and, in a strange way, sadder. The version that isn't special. The version that isn't the main character. The version that has to sit, unguarded, with the possibility that they are simply a person. Ordinary and flawed, capable of causing real harm, without a story to soften it. That's the collapse waiting underneath every escalated performance. And it's exactly why they will do almost anything to avoid it, including things that, from the outside, look completely irrational. This is why, once you stop believing them, their behavior often gets stranger before it gets quieter. You'll notice sudden generosity that seems to come from nowhere, grand gestures, uncharacteristic vulnerability, sometimes even tears that look real. Because at this point, they often are real, just not for the reason you think. Those tears usually aren't remorse for what they did to you. They're grief for the belief they can feel slipping away, the belief that has held their entire self-image together for years. You are watching someone mourn the loss of their own reflection in your eyes, and mistaking it, understandably, for mourning the relationship itself. Let's talk about what usually happens next, because there's a very specific pattern here, and once you see it, you'll recognize it everywhere. The first thing that tends to happen is a sudden increase in what looks like insight. They'll start naming things you never taught them to name. I know I've been defensive. I know I've hurt you. I know I have some narcissistic tendencies. This can be disarming, because it sounds like the accountability you spent years hoping for. But listen closely to when these admissions arrive. They almost never arrive during the moment of harm. They arrive precisely when they sense your belief slipping, which tells you these aren't insights born from reflection. They're insights born from urgency. It's not growth. It's damage control dressed in the language of growth, and the giveaway is always the same. The insight never actually changes the next action. The second thing that tends to happen, if the first doesn't work, is a shift toward blame that's dressed up as vulnerability. This is subtler and far more effective on someone who genuinely wants to be fair. Maybe I am like this because of how I grew up. I never had anyone show me healthy love. I'm trying. I promise I'm trying. Notice what this does. It doesn't ask you to hold them accountable. It asks you to hold their pain, to absorb responsibility for helping them heal from something they haven't actually committed to healing from. This is one of the most effective tools in the entire arsenal, precisely because it's built from real, often true, pain. Compassion is not the problem. The problem is being asked to trade your own clarity for their comfort, over and over, indefinitely, with no actual change required in return. And the third thing, the one that happens once both of those fail to restore your belief, is often silence from them. Real silence this time. Not the punishing kind, but a genuine withdrawal. Because at this point, some part of them has registered that the performance is no longer landing. And rather than face what that means, they start looking elsewhere for a stage where it still will. Here's what I want you to really understand from everything we've walked through today. The moment you stop believing a narcissist's version of events isn't a small shift. It is, in many ways, the single most powerful moment in the entire relationship. Because it's the moment the balance of power quietly, permanently changes hands. Not through an argument, not through an ultimatum, simply through clarity. You don't need them to admit anything. You don't need them to finally see what they did. You don't need the validation of them saying, out loud, you were right. Their devastation, their disorientation, their scrambling to restore your belief. That itself is the confirmation. It was never something you needed to extract from them. It was something that arrived on its own, the moment you stopped supplying what they'd been running on the whole time. So if you're in that place right now, the place where the words don't land the way they used to, where you catch yourself watching instead of reacting, do not mistake that clarity for coldness, and do not let anyone, especially them, convince you that noticing the pattern makes you the cruel one. You didn't become suspicious for no reason. You became accurate. And there is nothing to apologize for in finally seeing someone clearly, especially when they spent so long depending on you not to.